In a world where silence speaks louder than noise, and where progress often walks in shadows before stepping into the light, India rose not with arrogance, but with undeniable brilliance. They said India couldn't do it. They laughed, doubted, ridiculed. But India didn't respond with words. It answered with Chandrayaan-3, a spacecraft born of discipline, forged in resilience, and fueled by 1 billion quiet prayers, touched the moon's surface while the world stood still. And the British media, it crumbled under the weight of its own disbelief. This isn't just about science or exploration. This is a reminder that truth doesn't shout. It lands softly, surely, and unshakably. And when it does, the world watches and history listens. India's quiet success shattered global skepticism. Chandrayaan-3 marked a historic lunar landing. British media's narrative collapsed under facts. Scientific achievement silenced colonial condescension. A new space era dawned with India in command. They didn't scream back. They didn't protest the headlines or demand validation from the world. India simply stayed the course, worked in silence, and let results speak where words would have fallen short. For years, the world's most powerful voices looked at India's space ambitions with doubt, sometimes with mockery, and often with a subtle undertone of disbelief. They framed India as a developing nation with dreams too big for its budget. But India never sought their permission. It only needed its own vision and the courage to follow it. When Chandrayaan-3 launched, few outside the country truly believed it would succeed. The narrative in many Western outlets wasn't supportive. It was skeptical at best, dismissive at worst. Instead of marveling at the low-cost ingenuity or applauding the scientific determination, much of the coverage focused on what could go wrong. But India didn't respond to any of it. It did engage in a war of words. It went to work. In laboratories lit by ambition, in control rooms buzzing with quiet confidence, Indian scientists pushed forward. Every code, every calculation, every sleepless night built toward a single moment. And then, that moment arrived. Chandrayaan-3 landed softly on the moon's south pole, a place no nation had touched before. No drama, no bluster, just precision, clarity, and execution. A whisper of triumph that roared louder than any critic's voice. Suddenly, those headlines started to change. The same media that questioned India's capability began scrambling for explanations. How did India pull it off? How did they get there so fast and so efficiently? The answer was simple: focus, humility, and resolve. India didn't set out to destroy the British media or prove the West wrong. That was never the mission. But in doing what it did best, delivering results, India exposed the hollowness of every doubt cast upon it. The criticism didn't need to be confronted. It needed to be outlived. And in that moment, as Chandrayaan-3 stood firmly on lunar soil, India did what few expected. It rewrote the story, not with anger, but with undeniable proof. That's how silence wins, by rising above the noise and making history. It wasn't just a landing, it was a statement. When Chandrayaan-3 touched down near the moon's south pole, it did more than complete a mission. It made history in a way that even the most powerful spacefaring nations hadn't. the world watched as India, often seen as the underdog in global space exploration, became the very first country to reach a part of the lunar surface that had eluded others for decades. And they did it not with extravagance, but with precision, determination, and focus. What many considered a high-risk target, India made into a calculated victory. This wasn't a mission driven by the need to impress others. It was born out of a deeper motivation. The belief that science is for everyone and that exploration knows no monopoly. While other nations had poured billions into their lunar ambitions, India took a different path: lean, efficient, and unapologetically bold. The Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, built a mission not just to explore, but to inspire. They didn't aim for flashy headlines. They aimed for the moon, and they landed. In that moment, India didn't just succeed in a scientific endeavor. It achieved something symbolic. It proved that excellence doesn't belong to any one nation or hemisphere. That the pursuit of knowledge, when fueled by purpose and perseverance, can take flight from anywhere. What had once been dismissed as a distant dream became a moment of global recognition, not just for India, but for the spirit of human progress, for the millions watching around the world, especially the young minds in India. It was more than a televised event. It was a turning point, a moment that showed what's possible when a nation believes in its potential. The mission didn't need to be loud. The moon landing itself was quiet, but the impact that echoed through the corridors of history. India didn't compete to be first in a race. It aimed to do what had never been done. And when Chandrayaan 3 succeeded, it didn't just place hardware on lunar soil. It planted something deeper: pride, proof, and promise. A message that the future of space isn't limited to a few. It belongs to the brave. And on that day, India led the way. For decades, global media, especially outlets rooted in former colonial powers, have often carried an undercurrent of skepticism when covering India's achievements. The narrative, sometimes overt and often subtle, painted India as a nation that could aspire, but not truly arrive. When it came to science, space, or technological advancement, the tone was usually conditional. Can they? Will they manage? Is it too ambitious? So when India launched Chandrayaan 3, much of the British media coverage was filtered through that same lens of doubt. The focus wasn't on possibility, it was on potential failure. But India wasn't trying to impress headlines, it was aiming for the moon. The moment Chandrayaan 3 successfully landed near the lunar South Pole, everything shifted, not just in space, but here on Earth. In newsrooms that had once dismissed India's capabilities, the very voices that questioned whether India could pull it off were now scrambling to revise their tone. Those who once viewed India as an outsider in the elite circle of spacefaring nations were suddenly faced with undeniable evidence. Not only had India arrived, it had achieved something no other country had. The British media, in particular, found itself exposed. Its familiar framework of condescension no longer fit the reality. It had underestimated a nation that refused to be defined by old stereotypes. The result wasn't just a failed prediction, it was a narrative collapse. Their skepticism, once delivered with authority, now seemed hollow. Their tone, once dismissive, suddenly felt out of touch. But India didn't need to respond with outrage. It let the mission speak for itself. With quiet dignity, Indian scientists had done what few thought possible. They didn't debate the doubters. They outperformed them, and in doing so, they reminded the world that truth doesn't need permission to shine. It simply rises. The landing of Chandrayaan 3 didn't just disrupt the moon's surface. It disrupted the global perception of India's place in science, power, and progress. It forced a long overdue recalibration of how success is reported and by whom. And as those old narratives crumbled, one truth stood tall. India's silence had more force than their criticism. Because when achievement becomes undeniable, even the loudest skeptics fall silent. There was a time when India's space program was met with raised eyebrows and half smiles. Analysts questioned its purpose. Critics mocked its budget. And the global north often scoffed at its ambitions. How could a developing nation, still battling poverty and infrastructure challenges, dare to compete in the same space as NASA, ESA, or Roscosmos? Yet, year after year, India kept moving forward. Not loudly, not with declarations of supremacy, with a quiet kind of conviction. It was this spirit that gave birth to Chandrayaan 3, a mission not driven by ego, but by an unshakable sense of purpose. While many countries poured billions into space exploration, India focused on doing more with less. The world might not have noticed in the beginning, but ISRO's engineers and scientists knew exactly what they were doing. Chandrayaan 3 wasn't just about planting a flag or grabbing headlines. It was about science, about proving to themselves and to the world that precision, discipline, and ambition didn't require excessive wealth, only focused intent. When Chandrayaan 3 successfully landed near the moon's south pole, it wasn't an explosion of chest, thumping nationalism. It was something more dignified. The landing was methodical, smooth, and calm, just like the mission that brought it there. And it was in that moment of controlled silence that India made its loudest statement yet. Not with words, but with results. The global media, especially those who had long patronized India's efforts, could no longer ignore what had happened. The same experts who once predicted failure were forced to analyze success. It was a humbling shift in perspective. But for India, this wasn't a victory over the world. It was a triumph over doubt, especially the kind that had for so long been projected onto it. Chandrayaan 3's success proved that scientific excellence is not the monopoly of the West, nor is credibility determined by a country's GDP. It showed that the pursuit of knowledge is borderless, and that brilliance, when matched with grit, can thrive anywhere. India didn't need applause to move forward, and it certainly didn't need to argue with critics. It needed only to stay focused, stay grounded, and land exactly where it planned to, on the moon and in the pages of history. The world didn't expect India to lead. It wasn't supposed to be India standing at the frontier of space exploration. And yet, as Chandrayaan 3 touched down on the moon's south pole, it wasn't just a spacecraft landing. It was a seismic shift in the global balance of perception. In that quiet, calculated descent, India announced itself not with noise, but with mastery. The lunar South Pole had been untouched, unexplored, unclaimed. While global powers had tried and failed, India did not just try, it succeeded. And in that success, it ushered in a new era, one where leadership isn't defined by wealth or dominance, but by vision and execution. For decades, the domain of space was reserved for the so-called elite nations with deep pockets and historical influence. But India redefined the rules. With a mission that cost less than many Hollywood blockbusters, it achieved what others with far greater resources could not. It wasn't just about reaching the moon. It was about how India got there with humility, precision, and an unshakable belief in its people. This was leadership not born from muscle or might, but from intellect and resolve. The world's media, experts, and institutions were forced to pause and recalibrate. They could no longer treat India as the underdog or the follower. The images of Chandrayaan 3's successful landing weren't just flashes of scientific achievement. They were evidence that the map of global innovation had changed, that the torch had quietly passed to hands that were once underestimated. In that moment, India became more than a participant in space exploration. It became a leader. But India didn't declare itself as such. It let its work speak. While others launched media campaigns and sought headlines, India focused on outcomes. While others raced for attention, India moved with intention. And in doing so, it reminded the world that leadership is not about who speaks the loudest, but about who shows the way. Chandrayaan 3 wasn't just a mission. It was a message that no voice is too small, no dream too distant, and no nation too unlikely to lead. India led not by overpowering others, but by outperforming expectations. And as the dust settled on the moon's surface, the world looked to India, not with doubt, but with respect. And so, as the dust of the moon settled beneath the soft landing of Chandrayaan 3, a far greater storm was quieted here on Earth. Not a storm of nature, but of doubt, dismissal, and disbelief. India didn't just place a spacecraft on lunar soil. It placed a mirror before the world and asked, "Did you ever truly see us?" For too long, the answer was no. For too long, India was underestimated, its silence mistaken for weakness, its humility confused for hesitation. But this mission was not for validation. It was a quiet, unwavering pursuit of truth, of progress, and of possibility. The British media may have tried to define the narrative, but India rewrote it without a word. With science, with skill, with vision. It didn't roar, it resonated. It didn't argue, it acted. And that action silenced critics more thoroughly than any reply ever could. This was not just a win for India. This was a win for every nation told it wasn't ready, for every dream that seemed too big for its budget, for every child watching the stars and wondering if their country could ever reach them. India proved that greatness doesn't require permission. It requires perseverance. It requires belief. Chandrayaan 3 was not the end. It was a beginning. A new chapter where leadership is not inherited by power, but earned through purpose. Where science belongs to all, not just a privileged few. And where history remembers those who move with quiet courage. Because when they rise, the world cannot help but watch. India rose, and the world watched.